Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. Hayya ala salat. Hayya ala salat. Hayya ala falah. Hayya ala falah. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. La ilaha illallah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkelu alayh. Alhamdulillah min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. Wa ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu amma ba'd. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Brothers and sisters, before getting into the theme of the Qur'an today, I ask that we remember our brothers and sisters throughout this ummah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ may be in some kind of distress or suffering, whether we know the cause of its suffering or not. The most powerful weapon that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given this ummah is that of dua. So let us please take advantage of this, what Allah has given us. Remember our brothers and sisters in your dua who are living in the country of India, a country now that's ruled by a man who has openly declared his intention to remove the Muslim presence from the country of India. He's now pushing something called a uniform civil code. By that, he intends to have all women and the way that they dress in public follow a uniform standard, not that of Islam. And I don't know the exact figure. I'd hate to throw out a number that is well off. But just randomly thinking, I think it's close to 200 million Muslims in the country of India. So now this man who is allowing open declarations about genocide from members of their legislative bodies, now he's saying that no, those Muslim women walking around dressed in the way that they are dressed no longer be a part of Indian society. Let us pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect the Muslims of India and Kashmir from the kinds of attacks that they have been suffering. Those who are saying that because you're slaughtering the cows that we worship, and that those who are butchers and those who are selling beef, Muslims in the country of India have been attacked by just mobs, gangs of criminals just who are being allowed to attack Muslims simply because we can eat meat that the name of Allah, beef that the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been pronounced over. Let us pray for our brothers and sisters there. Let us pray for our brothers and sisters in Palestine. You know, in Palestine, it's not just what the military is doing and the police are doing to the Palestinian Muslims. It's also what the settlers, those who have come to this land of Palestine and who are raising towns and villages, pushing the Muslims out of certain parts, taking their homes. A few years ago, and I'll go on with the Khutbah. A few years ago, I was in Palestine. And I was going up the hill. There was a brother who was showing me and another brother around, and he lived in a house that was sitting atop a hill. And as we were going up the hill, a military policeman came up, and they had what looked like Uzis, whatever rifles, automatic weapons that they carried. And they started pushing us literally back down the hill, telling us that this place was off limits because the government has declared that there is some historical site that's near this man's house, this man with 10 children. But now he was forced out of his house. God knows best whether there was any intention to turn that house as part of a tourist attraction, or whether or not it was just another move to push Palestinian families out of their homes. Let us pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala relieve the suffering of our brothers and sisters throughout the ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Brothers and sisters, as all of us, I'm sure, know that today throughout the Muslim world is commonly known as the day of Ashura. That this day, the 10th day of Muharram, has tremendous significance for this ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there are different points of emphasis for the members of this ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We're all familiar with the hadith and the seerah literature when it tells us that when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam made the hijrah from Mecca to Medina, he found the Jewish community fasting, and it was the 10th of Muharram. And when he asked, why are you fasting on this day? They said that this is the day that we were liberated from the Fir'aun. And so we fast on this day, and we know from the hadith literature that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ instructed the ummah at that time that we have more right to fast than they have. I'm a brother of Musa alayhi salam, meaning a prophetic brother of the Prophet Musa. I and you, we have more right to fast on this day, but either the day before the night, and then fast on the 10th of Muharram, or fast on Muharram and the 11th of Muharram. Brothers and sisters, there's also a hadith that's found in the Sahih of Imam Khalid Griggs, that's narrated by Umar, where he said that the Prophet Muhammad observed the fast of Muharram and ordered the Muslims to fast on that day. But when the fasting of the month of Ramadan was described, the fasting of the Ashura was abandoned. Abdullah did not used to fast on that day unless it coincided with his routine day of fasting. Brothers and sisters, the Prophet ﷺ was also quoted in a hadith that's contained in Tirmidhi, that the most virtuous fasting after the month of Ramadan is fasting in the month of Ashura. So I'm not trying to say that by offering hadith not to fast on 2 days, a day before, a day after is a day of Ashura. But there is some scholarship that says that the command to fast on those days after the revelation of the Qur'an instructing us to fast during the month of Ramadan, that the requirement to fast on the day of Ashura was no longer something that we had to do. Brothers and sisters, I want to emphasize on this day of Ashura another significant, important event that occurred on this particular day, on the 10th of Muharram. That, of course, we know the Prophet Muhammad said that he received information from the Jewish community that this is the day that the Jews were liberated from the tyranny of Pharaoh. But also we should understand that we're looking for significant days, those red letter days on our calendar that we can turn to, that there are other points of significance for this day that you and I should remember, that you and I should recognize that it's important to the history and development of this ummah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu. I want to go through a long, detailed history. But I think all of us should be aware that in the year 680 on the Muslim calendar, that on the year 680, a relative few years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu, that the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu was martyred. Now, you probably have heard and read about these two beloved grandsons of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu, Hassan and Hussein. Now, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu loved those kids so much that the hadith literature and the Shari'a literature tells us that while he was leading Salat, they would come and climb on his back and play on his back while he was leading the ummah in Salat, and that the Prophet Muhammad would not raise up until they had gotten off his back. There's so many quotes of the Prophet Muhammad. There's so many recitations about how he loved these grandsons of his, the sons of Ali, and his beloved daughter Fatima. That there was a very close union with these children that the Prophet Muhammad had. Within the year of 680, on the Gregorian calendar, we know that the son, one of these grandsons, Hussein, was martyred on this day of Ashura. That the son of the Prophet Muhammad was Hussein, was given an invitation by the Muslims of Iraq at a time when there was a dispute about who should be the successor to Ali, the father of Hussein. After Ali was martyred, the ummah was divided as to who would lead this ummah now. At first, the offer was made to Hassan, the brother of Hussein. And you and I know that after a while, Hassan, in a very short period of time, said, no, I don't want to take this responsibility. There's too much division that's going on. Give it to someone else. Alhamdulillah, you've offered this to me, but I don't want to divide the ummah up. My father has just so recently been murdered, he's been martyred. And not that I'm afraid of martyrdom, but I'm afraid that my accepting this would divide up this ummah even more. So now, the people, the Muslims in what's known today as Iraq, sent an invitation to Hussein and told Hussein that we have so many Muslims that if you just come to Kufa, come over here to Iraq, that we will support you. We will be your defenders. No one will be able to do anything against you if you just come on over here. And so Imam Hussein, listening, even though when you read the history, there were those who told Imam Hussein, don't go over there. We don't know what those brothers may do. But there were those who told Hussein that yes, go, you should be the leader and the caliph over the Muslims. So Hussein went over to Kufa. And when he got there, he found that much of what he had been told about all of this support, he'll protect you with our lives, that it was just talk coming out of their mouths. And when he got there, he found that there was just a small number of brothers and sisters who were willing to protect him and to declare, you are our talent. We're not going to follow Yazid. We know the cruelties that Yazid has done. We know he's the son of one of the Sahaba of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu. We know that Muawiyah was one of the scribes of the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu. But this son of his does not equal up to his father in his character and how he's governing. So no, he's saying, come and we will support you. You and I know. Just try to shorten the story just a little bit. You and I know that Yazid sent up to 4,000, sometimes you see as many as 7,000 of his soldiers to go stop Hussein before he's able to gather up so many supporters that we can't control him anymore. So now Hussein and his small family, just a relative few Muslims, there's some accounts that there were only 72 in the party of Imam Hussein. 72 to go against 4,000, 5,000 armed soldiers. And with that 72, you're talking about women and children, you're talking about babies. But it made no difference when the army of Yazid encountered the 72 who were with Imam Hussein. It made no difference what their composition was. It didn't matter. All that mattered was that they had, this army had an order from the coward, the person who was representing himself as the coward. Bring me Hussein's head. Cut off the head of the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, the one that we all know how much he loved him, how much he adored his grandsons. Cut off his head. This was their command from Yazid. Cut his head off and bring it back to me. And to just jump a little bit in the history, and this is actually literally what happened. After a relatively short battle, Hussein was decapitated. And the head was taken on a platter and presented to Yazid. And the history records that Yazid had a cane, and he began to strike the head of the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, keeping in mind this is just a few years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. And this slaughter of Hussein and slaughter of his family took place on the 10th of Muharram, a day for whatever reason that we recognize that this day is special and important to Muslims, but no matter what the reason, no matter why, we know that Muharram is one of the sacred months. We know that the brother who was beheaded was the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad. And so Yazid ordered, okay, bring those who survive. I want to confront them. I want to just put fear in their hearts so that no one else, no other family members or any other Muslim would dare to oppose my authority. And as we know, as one of the most courageous, boldest speeches in the opinion of many brothers and sisters, including myself, given the context in which the oldest daughter of Ali ibn Abu Talib, Zainab, that the speech that she gave in front of Yazid after they were brought in as prisoners, after the majority were just women and children because all of the men had been slaughtered, that the daughter of Ali ibn Abu Talib gave a speech, a sermon. It's called the Sermon of Zainab. And she stood in front of this tower and gave a speech that just embodies the kind of courage that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala demands from each and every one of us when we call ourselves Muslim. Brothers and sisters, this sermon of Zainab, the daughter of Ali ibn Abi Talib, is one that if you haven't read it in its entirety, if you only just hear about it from football lectures like I'm doing now, I'm sure that if you go to check Google, you'll be able to find or go to AI or whichever way you access historical information. Go to one of these sites and read the sermon. And keep in mind the context in which Zainab is delivering the sermon to the ruler, the self-imposed ruler over all of the Muslims. And what we find is that this sister Zainab showed a kind of courage that every Muslim man, every Muslim woman should possess. I'm not trying to say that every Muslim woman should have the qualities and characteristics of Zainab. This was something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given to her, a special kind of courage in her heart, an ability to express herself that went beyond just her personal feelings, but went into the heart, the very root of what Islam itself stands for and what we should stand for as Muslims. Brothers and sisters, Zainab, in confronting the self-imposed caliph Yazid, that Zainab gave us a message of endurance, a message that no matter what it is we're confronted with, that we will maintain our belief, that we will maintain our direction, our goals. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us a command in the Qur'an. And we're all familiar with this particular command. How it manifests in our lives depends upon the iman in our heart, the courage or lack of courage in our hearts. That every single individual Muslim who has reached the age of discernment, that they are old enough to know right from wrong, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given each and every one of us the responsibility to stand up for justice, stand up for what is right. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين بالقسط شهداء لله. That, oh, you who believe, stand out firmly for justice as witnesses to Allah. That our stand that we take for what is right and what is just, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala characterizes this as being witnesses to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're following this command. None of us are exempt from this. None of us are exempt. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, in a very famous hadith, has equated taking a stand for what is right and just with having faith itself. When the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ made it clear that as an individual Muslim, each and every one of us here today, that if we see something that's not right, we see injustice happening in our face, then we are required, just from our shahada, to take a stand against it, to try to stop the injustice. Don't turn your head and act like you don't see it. We walk down the street and we see all kinds of foolishness going on. No one is saying, put yourself in a position where you're going to get shot by trying to break up people fighting with knives or with guns. I'm not talking about this kind of thing. But those things that we have the capability of stopping a boom and injustice as Muslims, as those who have claimed Shahada to Allah, we have a responsibility to stop it with our hands. We can't stop it with our hands. We have to at least speak out against it. And if we're not even in a position to do that, that we're so weak in this society, then we have to at least hate it in our hearts and not be a passive helper of those who are doing injustice. Brothers and sisters, Allah tells us in the Qur'an that this taking a stand for justice is not limited to the kuffar. It's not limited to the mystery kingdom. It's not limited, though, even if it's against ourselves. If we are doing something, take a right stance to stop our individual self from doing what's wrong. If this is against your parents, our beloved parents, and they're doing something wrong, as an obedient son, as an obedient daughter, we must respect our parents. We must not show disrespect to them, but still, if they are doing something against the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu in a respectful way, children are saying, the children of our parents, as the child against my mother, against my father, in a respectful manner, I take a stand for what is just and what is right when I know what they're doing is not right, whether it's against those who are rich, those who have influence, or whether it's against the poorest people in the society. When you read this sermon of Hazrat Zainab, what you will find is the kind of courage that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives each and every one of us when we say that the consequences of my saying or doing what's right outweigh the possible consequences against me for doing or saying what's right. So when we leave here today, keep this in mind as we move about this society. That if we're seeing something on our jobs, if we're seeing something in our educational institutions, that we should not just sit silent and act like we don't know there's something that I disagree with this because it's wrong. Don't try to encourage in our schools, on our jobs, in the market, in our neighborhoods. Take a stand for what is just and what is right. And when we start, or when we have become more conscious of this is what we're doing, then we have a greater appreciation for those that Allah has sent before us from the time of the Prophet Muhammad and before, those who were only worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will have more appreciation for those who have stood in American society and taken a position regardless of the consequences, regardless of whether they feel that I'm going to lose my life if I take a stand for what is just and what is right. Like El Hajj Malik Al Shabazz, Malcolm X. to take a stand for what is just and what is right, like Imam Jamil Abdullah al-Hamid, who he and his community, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's lead and their help, were able to just shut down a whole side of town in southwest Atlanta, Georgia, that was just a haven for open distribution of drugs, where children couldn't play in the park, where children couldn't walk and women couldn't walk the street without running the risk of getting robbed or assaulted. That this stand that he was taking has resulted in an unjust incarceration for now going on 22 years. But this is the price that we pay for our shahada. This is the price that each and every one of us will pay when we do what is right, not promising that this is going to happen to any of us. But our responsibility is not to worry about consequences, but to do what we are commanded to do. Oh, Lord, help us to understand this deen in a manner that is beneficial for us in this world and in the next. Oh, Allah, strengthen our connection to you and to the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad SAW in a way that will strengthen our deen. And oh Allah, make not the Ummah of the Prophet Muhammad SAW an object of test for the disbelief of people. But the sisters have just a couple of quick announcements. The first one is that the mosque, beginning maybe the